Hi all, I have another amazing instructive attacking game to show you today, and I'm wearing my special Greek gift t-shirt. It's actually rather topical for this game. It may or may not have a bishop sacrifice on h7, or if it does, try to guess exactly when it happens. So this game is Cenek Kottnauer against Alexander Kotov. I find it amusing actually. A few things about this Art of Attack classic book. Kotov is in there a few times. It's 4-1 against Kotov. I suspect that the author might not have been in love with Think Like a Grandmaster to have Kotov on the receiving end quite a few times compared to other players. But that's another story. Let's have a look at this game. So this is after World War II, 1946, the Moscow-Prague tournament. Cenek Kottnauer, playing against Kotov, Alexander Kotov, plays the English opening. And Cenek, by the way, ended up in England, originally from the Czech Republic, and he ended up playing in tournaments like Hastings later in his career. So anyway, the English opening, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, c6, knight f3, knight f6, e3, and you might think this is a really solid opening, isn't it? Bishop d3, black takes on c4, bishop takes b5. So this is Semi-Slav, the Moran Blumenfeld variation, apparently. a6, e4, black plays c5, e5. This has all been seen before. It's quite a theoretical position. C takes d. In this game, we have knight takes b5, a takes, and now e takes f6. In this particular game, Alexander Kotov played queen b6. G takes f6 might actually be quite interesting. For example, on castling queen b6, queen e2, black has some dynamic play. And for example, this position, engine seems to think is okay. And actually, instead of Rook d1 though, there have been some really high level stem games in this particular position as well. Bishop f4, for example, was tried by David Navarra quite successfully against Ding Liren just in Shamkir 2019, very, very topical high level tournament just last year, to absolute super grandmasters. That game, you can see that black was playing a really dynamic game here, but it may have backfired a bit. We see white picking up the exchange up and managing to convert that later in 45 moves. So that's a very, very interesting stem game here. But anyway, we have queen b6 in this game, and white inflicts structural damage against the kingside pawns. Okay, white castles, black castles, and then we have queen e2. Very interesting move. Puts pressure on b5, threatens queen e4, which would hit h7 and a8. Black has to address this threat, it seems. And Kotov does so with knight c5. Interesting, it does deprive the use of e4, but has it slipped up on something? Has it created a so-called a weakness of the last move? That the knight no longer has access to f6. You might wonder, well, so what? But isn't f6 connected with h7? Doesn't that make the soft spot even softer? By the way, just step this back. Okay, so you might be having suspicions here as well, because I did ask you to spot the Greek gift opportunities. Instead of queen e2, this, it isn't working here because black has got that access to knight f6. So this kind of mechanism, the queen can be repulsed simultaneously, defending h7 and hitting the queen, and that's generally going to be a disaster for white, that tempo gain in defense. So yeah, white has to tread carefully, and so the knight being lured away from f6 makes a critical success factor, you could say. If you're going to study critical success factors for the success of this bishop sack, then this is one of them, the soft spots, how easily they're defendable. If knight f6 had been played here, it turns out bishop takes b5 might not even be the strongest move. Bishop f4 might be good to try and get quite a nice looking pin here with bishop e5 and putting pressure on d4. For example, this position, white's getting a significant edge. Yeah, d4 looks loose. It looks like a very dominating position. White's got that passed pawn there. So maybe that's an interesting way to play it. But white can also just simply just take on b5 with an edge as well. This tactic, knight takes d4. So if queen takes, bishop takes, that should be an edge for white as well. But anyway, we have knight c5. So yes, as you might suspect, what would you play here for 200 points? Okay. Yes, you're right. You would take the pawn. No, you wouldn't take the pawn. This is the art of attack. It's about the art of attack. This is actually an entire chapter devoted to the classic bishop sacrifice. Yes. And it got me wondering, actually, because I made my t-shirt range on the classic bishop sacrifice, in effect. And I'm wondering, am I missing out on t-shirt opportunities based on his other chapters? So he had a chapter on focal points, and he had a chapter on mating patterns. There's lots of potential t-shirt opportunities. So check out teespring.com/Kingscrusher, because I might be in production soon based on this book. Anyway, or maybe not. So anyway, bishop takes h7, as my t-shirt says. Bishop takes h7. I've won countless games of this. It seems this is a very underestimated piece sacrifice. And even if it does not clearly go to a forced checkmate, you know what? I don't even think it's about reinforcing the attack, because you can't just work with a queen and one piece. The attack's not going to work. I think it's really about getting very high quality pieces with a king kind of exposed as the outcome. So even the rooks, they get to full power. Imagine these rooks get to full power, even if you can't calculate this to a forced checkmate. Imagine the rooks. This is outrageous. They're at full power. Black's at breaking point. The possibility of a weakness of the last move, if your position's at full power in every single piece, you're maximizing the opportunity of the opponent making a huge mistake. So that's a very interesting consideration, even if this is not working. Another very interesting consideration is the bailout option to a draw. So if it's not perfectly working, sometimes you'll just get a draw by perpetual check. Funny enough, by the way, this is an interesting bit of trivia. In this particular position, someone who's 2440 patron, maybe he didn't really believe in this sacrifice. He couldn't really calculate it to the end. He's playing against the 2430 in Hungary 1989, and he played the meek move bishop c2. The problem with this, if you don't go for the sack, black just got a phenomenal position. That game went like this, believe it or not. Black's blunting that bishop, getting a dominating centre. Doesn't matter about b5 here, because look at this. Black's position was absolutely roaring, with huge queenside pressure and a huge pawn on d3. This is just looks entirely unpleasant, and it was. White, kind of got crushed here, basically. Well, kind of. Well, black here got a big advantage and went on to win in 41 moves. So if you don't go for it here, if you don't go for this and play the meek bishop c2, it's not great prospects. There's a model, not a model game. There's a stem game. It doesn't work out that well. So you've got to go for it here. Bishop takes h7. So you lure the king out. King takes knight g5 check, and you can rule out some options kind of immediately. The most easy one to rule out is king h8, because then that's just asking for queen h5 and then just mating on h7. So we can immediately rule that one out if we're looking at candidate defensive moves. On king g8, queen h5, rook d8, queen takes here, king h8. Vukovic, he didn't really have access to the top engines, and he gave maybe not the most accurate move here with not queen g6 but f4. And actually that's kind of instructive in its own right, because he kind of gave the idea that white would be okay just winning some material. And this shows why it's so brilliant that Ginger GM, is terribly cynical about this. You don't want to play an attack and just be a little bit material up, especially when the opponent has got a lot of counterplay. I think that is a golden kind of rule of the successful attacking player. That is not a situation. This is not a situation as an attacking player that you'd really want in your heart. This position, just winning material, because black has got certain upsides. You know, this passed pawn, the pressure on the a5. This rook's blunted from b3, knight b3 with that pin if it's blunted. So, you know, there's nasty things going on after bishop d7. Technically, the computers might say, oh, you know, an advantage, but it's actually, look at black's pieces, they're roaring. So that's not really an amazing way to play it. So thankfully, if you follow the online interactive course, you know, Simon Williams, completely rightly in my view, recommends instead queen g6, king g8, and there's a lot of fun and games technically here in this position. White was threatening queen h7 checkmate, so the king on self-service mode, and here actually there's an incredible idea. I mean, I personally have my own pet theories about attacking and taking away escape squares. If we consider f8 an escape square, it turns out here bishop d2 is light bay engines, and it's got a point to get on this diagonal. I kind of find that quite nifty in its own right. Just connect the rooks, hello, get to focus on the escape square. This might actually be one of the more accurate moves, this quiet move, with bishop b4 centricity. So for example here, bishop b4, and you can see, you know, there's a lot of trouble. If the knight moves, then it'll be back to like queen h7 checkmate, because we've covered that escape square. So it's very, very useful to see how you can cover escape squares, even if you are a piece down. If we look at this position, it looks as though black is actually crumbling. For example, there's too much pressure on the position after rook f3, you know, threatening rook h3. And there's situations, yeah, black's totally just crumbling into dust. So it seems there's a really cute idea here, technically, of bishop d2. So this really is pretty advanced analysis, though, bishop d2. There's other ways of playing it as well at move 22, but this seems like really, really interesting to me, at least. But yeah, there's other ways of playing it as well. So anyway, let's just go back. So queen g6 here would be really interesting. So we'll go back to knight g5 check. Yeah, so king g8 seems rather doomed. There is also, by the way, there is also, hang on, let me just show you something else about this. This is just for the record. In this position, there is also this other idea of bishop f4, which is intriguing. And if queen b7, bishop e5, and there's a lot of pressure here actually. White's threatening sometimes rook f3 to h3 and rook h8, because if king takes, there's queen h7 checkmate. So there's a subtle kind of threat of that tactical, you know, mating pattern. That's just crumbling for black, for example, like this. So yeah, there's all sorts of very, very interesting stuff in this king g8 line. But I'll put the PGN, the detailed analysis, you might want to see it, I'll put it in the description of the video. So anyway, the king actually comes out to g6. So there's a massive analysis for king g8. But as I say, there's a really, really fascinating idea in that line with bishop d2. But king g6, and we have here queen g4. And cynics of this Greek gift, you know, might say, well, if the queen's only left with another piece, it's not a big deal. If you haven't got forced checkmate, have you just lost a piece? Black plays what looks to be often quite a key defensive move, f5. And now queen g3 is very, very important. You don't want to give away a tempo with queen h4, because rook h8 is quite a killer tempo gain, and black would be massively advantageous there. So queen g3 keeps the pressure, keeps the discovered check dangers. We have king f6. Yeah, there's interesting defensive tries in this position. Very, very interesting. a number of them. So this is at move 19, king f6 was played. If rook f7 at move 19, maybe bishop f4 is interesting, but there's also another, and this is another phenomenal idea, you know, with the latest technology analysing this position. In h4, let me just show you bishop f4 first, though. This position is very, very dangerous. Or is it? Let's see. Carry on here. This scenario all occurred in a game, believe it or not. This all occurred in a particular game. We are actually at another STEM game, which is Kottnauer against Ludek Pastebin. And you might wonder, what? I've just showed you another STEM game with 19 rook f7. You're right. Ludek Pastebin, Pastebin. He's a fantastic player, middle game author in his own right. In fact, I had one of his books. He played this rook f7 resource in the game Kottnauer against Pastebin in Moscow the year later, 1947. Let me just show you this. So we have bishop f4, e5, knight takes, king takes, bishop takes, queen g6, white took here, and after king f6, that was a blunder actually. b4 should have been an even position, but king f6 was played, and in fact white kind of messed up at some point here. After king f2, king e5, king e3 check, king d2, king d4, rook e1. This was a really key moment. Ludek Pastebin actually, with the two minor pieces, is faced with the potential for white to have outside passed pawns on both sides of the board. He blundered actually with knight e6. It turns out Ludek Pastebin could have actually won the game with, can you guess if I give you 10 seconds to pause the video? Okay, it turns out bishop takes b3 was winning here for black. There's two not connected passed pawns, two very usefully associated passed pawns, and whatever white does, it's just worse for white. That's one variation, and another is if you carry on just with the h pawn, then b3 and then b2, and this is just pushing white back and winning. So yeah, this is a very, very interesting game here where but thankfully for our hero Kottnauer, knight e6 was played, and basically the rook started to overwhelm the minor pieces, and black didn't really stand a chance. The connected the passed pawns on both sides of the board meant that, you know, black's really overstretched. The minor pieces couldn't do anything against that rook, and yeah, that was absolutely winning for white in the end. Those passed pawns, absolute killers. So yeah, he won against Ludek Pastebin a year later in this very variation. But if we have a look at this more cynically, instead of bishop f4, h4 is actually, if anyone wants to revive this line and is put off by that Pastebin game, h4 introduces actually a dangerous passed pawn into the variations, straight through all these variations. For example, like this, h5 check. And in fact, this position, you can see that the h pawn is really dangerous. Yeah, this is getting absolutely critical, where the h pawn becomes a major factor in its own right. That threatens h8, queening, and it's pretty hopeless here after queen takes d4 check, queen takes d7. So yeah, there were sort of ways of actually improving on the rook f7 with h4 here in that key stem game. So fascinating stuff there with rook f7. Also at move 19, if we look at bishop f6 for the record, then knight takes e6 check, knight takes f8. This position with queen g6 is overwhelming. Off the check, there's rook a e1, and here this is just overwhelming for example, like this, it's crushing because, you know, there's f4. White's got an overwhelming advantage. If 19 rook g8, actually this might be one of the ways, it seems, with current technology looking at these variations, it seems black might actually be strangely holding, even with b4 as a resource. It seems as though maybe black can actually hold this kind of position. It's weird and wonderful stuff. But yeah, rook g8 might be it's an odd move perhaps to consider, but maybe that's the way to play it. But anyway, in the game we have actually a mistake. King f6, it seems a mistake. King f6, it makes white's task a little bit easier, and we have here this idea of bringing reinforcements in the game. And as I mentioned, you know, maximizing the quality of these rooks could be a major thing to kind of remember, because I think we're all going to forget all the technical analysis of this and other games I present. But just try and remember to maximize the rooks. If you're going to play a Greek sacrifice, it's a very strange idea, but if you look at the comparative quality, actually, intuitive of these rooks compared to these rooks, look how the rook distortions happen here after bishop f4. The rooks are now connected. That's one little step. And we're bringing in reinforcements. Because if we messed around with just the knight and queen here, this isn't going to sort of do much. Instead of bishop f4, if we had played knight h7, this is truly pathetic, trying to win some material. It means that black's just going to have a big advantage with zero problems, and the quality of black's pieces is going to go up and up. The king safety has also been increased, basically. And I believe it's the strengths of the rooks are intimately connected with black's king safety. And that knight really needs to be kept around. So bishop f4 keeps the dangerous knight around, keeps the king safety low, and means these rooks have great career prospects. So we have here king e7 being played. If knight d7, knight takes e6, and here rook e1 and queen g5. This is absolutely crushing. So yeah, knight d7 gets in the way basically of things there, you know, allowing that knight takes e6. So king e7, and look at this, rook ac1. This is what I mean. There's rook distortions happening now. Look at the comparison of the rooks. These rooks are now coming onto natural attacking files. And I just believe that their career prospects have been enhanced by the lack of king safety, by this aggressive knight on the fifth rank, by this battery striking along this diagonal. There's lots of common squares, common focal points like d6 with this battery. The battery affords, as I say to my chess students, lots of common squares are generated by a battery automatically. The rooks have fantastic opportunities here. Black's at breaking point. And in fact, so much so, black essentially crumbles with the next move, actually, in a way. Bishop d7 just needs a little nudge, you know, to break the camel's back, as I say, the final straw. Can you guess what the final straw is here? White to play here for 200 points. What would you play with white? And you know, I just want to re-emphasize, I'm such a fan of the Greek gift. I have to take personal care myself in the implications of this example game, and I think you need to have some nerve indeed to be a piece down and just think about your rooks. That's what I'm suggesting. The rooks are so much better, and because of the king safety implications and the common squares and the pressure. But here, the final straw is b4. It's nudging away from that e6. So the knight goes to a6. So that's the kind of weakness of the last move. And guess what? White plays here. So we've got a lot of common square targets, focal points, you could call them, where black's also kind of weak as well. So 200 points. White to play here. What does white play in this position? Okay, knight takes e6. Yes, knight takes e6. The knight's just come away from e6. It's a very logical move, chain reaction move. Bishop takes, and now queen takes g7. You might think, well, maybe black can defend this after rook f7. these rooks are at full blast. They've got, this rook's looking at c8 sometimes, and this rook's awkward. These rooks have now really gone into passive mode compared to these rooks, full offensive versus defensive rooks. And the thing is, the king is now being pushed potentially on the back row, but it refuses for a moment. It has to refuse, because after king d7 was played, but if king e8, then the queen finds this rook actually a common square after check. Then if rook f8, we just crash through like that. And otherwise, if king d7, then yeah, there's queen c8 found, slicing the king. It's going to be really horrible soon. For example, here, bishop f4, rook e5, for example, looks pretty good. So yeah, king d7, but black's position is on its last legs. There are real common squares everywhere now with this bishop, this rook, and this queen. The knight's done a good job. In the ghost of the knight that's disappeared from the board, after queen h8, look at this commonality, c8, d8, afforded by this cooperation here. Massive piece cooperation. This extra knight is not very helpful. And also another presence, you could argue, well, the opposite coloured bishops are often great for the attacking player, because it means that white has got no counterpart. The dark squares are more incisive generally. This bishop can't do anything about the dark squares. So black tries to cling on to the c8 square here with, queen b8. Just to put this on the board, if knight takes b4, queen c8 check, and queen takes e6 is checkmate. So queen b8. But alas, queen b8 has a weakness of the last move. It's just neglected d4, and that's taken. And black had to resign here. Black is actually, it's absolutely crushing this final possession. And worth a mention, I believe, if queen d6, this neglects the rook on a7, funny enough. So there's something I find comical about bouncing from one corner to almost the other extreme corner, but just to win material there. And then this is just pinning the queen. This is just crushing stuff. It's going to be all over pretty shortly after that. So yeah, this is absolutely devastating stuff. Queen takes d4. If queen d6, yeah, then it's take. If king e8, then we just take that bishop. And if here, we just go here, and this is a forced checkmate actually like this. That's the neatest way. And in that line, by the way, if the king had gone to f8, then there's the neat go back to h8 with checkmate. So yeah, the game ended here. So I think there are some very, very interesting points about this game example for the potential Greek gifter that I think actually you could say it's down to win probability, maximizing win probability, not looking for a definite concrete outcome of either being material up or a forced checkmate, because be careful what you wish for. A bit of material up with the opponent having counterplay is not good news quite often. And if there's no checkmate, that means what are you going to do? You're not going to do the Greek gift. You're going to do bishop c2. There's a stem game, black's obliterating white there. So you play the Greek gift, and maybe I'm taking some personal lessons from this game example. Think about maximizing the blast of your rooks. They're bound to create common squares with your queen at some point. The queen is like, the most attacking player on the board, the most versatile and dangerous. Get coordination with the queen by maximizing your rooks as a result of a Greek gift. And the opponent's extra knight, and especially if you've got the opposite coloured bishops, you've also got those opportunities intuitively as well. You've got a strength on the dark squares, the bishop without the counterpart on the dark squares. So I think you have to play it with the win probability concept in mind, not certain technical outcomes which are either undesirable or incalculatable or just not there. So with that intuition for win probability and for this faith that you will get the common squares working or the dark squares working incisively, I think it makes the Greek gift a fantastic weapon in its own right. And I'm absolutely staggered. He's got an entire chapter about the classic bishop sacrifice. So that is why also you definitely need to buy my t-shirt at Kingscrusher. No, at teespring.com/Kingscrusher. My t-shirt, yeah. As well as the Art of Attack course. Yeah, you should check out the Art of Attack course as well. the whole chapter on this classic bishop sacrifice. So Kingscrusher TV /Art of Attack, fantastic video commentary by Ginger GM, who has great cynicism and puts his own, attacking mindset into these positions and what you should aim for intuitively. So fantastic stuff there to learn from for the attacking player. Okay. Comments, questions, likes, shares, subscribes, all appreciated. Thanks very much.
Every battle is won by preparation. We've taken one of the most popular chess books ever written and rewired it for the modern player. The Art of Attack. Learn with Chessable's state-of-the-art move trainer technology, presented by myself, Grandmaster Simon Williams. I'll talk you through 29 hours worth of educational video content, from attacking the uncastled king, bishop sacrifices, diagonal attacks, and classic pawn storms. Paint your opponent's king into a corner with the Art of Attack.